My name is Alina Vance, and I am a 29-year-old woman living in the beautiful mountain city of Asheville, North Carolina. For most of my life, I have been the kind of person who takes care of everyone else before herself. I work as a successful landscape architect, and I have spent years building a comfortable life for myself in this vibrant community. I'm known for my patience and my kindness, but those are the very traits that a man named Marcus decided to exploit. Marcus and I were together for nearly 5 years, and for every single one of those years, I was the one who carried the financial and emotional weight of our relationship. Marcus called himself a freelance photographer, but he spent more time drinking expensive craft beer and talking about his artistic vision than he did actually taking pictures. I paid the rent for our beautiful apartment overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains, and I paid for every grocery bill and every utility and even the high-end camera equipment he claimed he needed to be successful. I loved him with all of my heart, and I truly believed that we were a team working toward a future together. However, the world I had built came crashing down on a Tuesday afternoon while Marcus was out at a supposed gallery meeting. He had left his tablet on the kitchen counter and it started pinging with notifications that were too frequent to ignore. When I looked at the screen, I did not see business messages. Instead, I saw a long history of romantic and suggestive conversations with a woman named Chloe who lived only 2 towns away. My heart stopped when I realized that he had been seeing her for over a year, and he was using the extra cash I gave him for gas and supplies to buy her jewelry and take her to fancy dinners. He even told her that I was just a crazy roommate who was obsessed with him and that he was only staying in the apartment until his big break came through. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach and the betrayal burned through my veins like fire. I wanted to confront him the moment he walked through the door, but I knew that a man like Marcus would just lie and manipulate his way out of it. He had a way of making me feel like I was the one who was wrong. So I decided to play a much longer and much more calculated game. For months, Marcus had been begging me to take him on a luxury trip to the Canadian Rockies. He said he needed the majestic scenery of places like Banff and Jasper to jumpstart his career and create a portfolio that would finally make him famous. I had originally told him we could not afford it, but after I found out about his cheating, I changed my mind. I told him that I had received a massive bonus at work and that I wanted to treat him to the vacation of his dreams. He was so happy that he actually hugged me and told me I was the best thing that ever happened to him, which almost made me sick to my stomach. I spent the next few weeks meticulously planning every detail of our trip while pretending that everything was perfect between us. I watched him text Chloe under the dinner table while I was sitting right across from him, and it only made my resolve stronger. We flew into the region and picked up a high-end rental sport utility vehicle that I had fully insured in my name only. The plan was to drive deep into the heart of the mountains to a secluded lodge that was far away from any major cities. On the day of our departure, we started a 5-hour drive through some of the most remote and rugged terrain I had ever seen. Marcus was in high spirits and he spent the entire drive talking about how he was going to become a legend in the photography world and how he might even leave me behind once he became a millionaire. He said it as a joke, but I knew he meant every word of it. As we drove further away from civilization, the cell phone service began to fade away until our phones were nothing more than expensive paperweights. We finally arrived at the lodge in the middle of the night and the air was freezing and the forest was pitch black. Marcus was exhausted from the travel and the altitude, so he fell into a deep sleep the moment his head hit the pillow. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I did not sleep at all. I sat in a chair by the window and watched the clock until it was 3 in the morning. I moved through the room like a ghost and packed all of my belongings back into my suitcase. I went into his wallet and saw that he only had about $20 in cash because he always relied on my credit cards for everything. I knew he had a small amount of money in his personal bank account, but I also knew that the lodge we were staying at was incredibly expensive and they would require a massive deposit if they realized my card was no longer on file. I took the keys to the rental car and I quietly closed the door to the room. I walked out into the freezing night air and I felt a surge of adrenaline that made me feel more alive than I had in years. I started the car and began the long 5-hour drive back toward the nearest major airport. As I drove through the winding mountain roads, I thought about all the times he had lied to me and all the money he had drained from my bank account. I thought about how he was currently sleeping soundly in a room he could not afford in a country where he had no transportation and no friends. By the time the sun began to peek over the jagged peaks of the Rockies, I was miles away. I made it to the airport and returned the rental car before checking into a flight that headed straight back to North Carolina. I landed in Asheville and went straight to our apartment where I had already arranged for a moving crew to meet me. We packed up every single thing that I had paid for, which was essentially everything in the unit. I left his clothes and his cheap personal items in a pile in the middle of the empty living room. I then went to the leasing office and showed them the evidence of his behavior, and because the lease was only in my name, I was able to terminate it and move out immediately. I changed my phone number and blocked him on every single social media platform. A few hours later, I checked my old email account on a public computer, and I saw a barrage of messages from him. He had finally woken up and realized I was gone. He was panicking and screaming through his keyboard asking where I was and how he was supposed to get home. He told me he was stranded at the lodge and they were threatening to call the police because he could not pay the bill for the night. I waited for another hour before I sent him one single message back. I told him that I knew about Chloe and I knew about the money and I knew about every single lie he had told me for the last year. I told him that since he was such a talented photographer, he should have no problem using his skills to find a way home. I told him that he was now Chloe's problem and that he should never attempt to contact me again. I found out later from a mutual acquaintance that Marcus had to call his parents and beg them for money to pay the hotel bill and get a bus ticket back across the border. It took him 4 days to get back, and when he finally arrived at the apartment, it was completely empty and the locks had been changed. He had nowhere to go and no one to turn to because Chloe did not want a man who was broke and homeless. He ended up having to move back into his childhood bedroom in a tiny town where there were no opportunities for his supposed career. Meanwhile, I have never been happier. I have a new apartment that is filled with peace, and I have saved more money in the last 6 months than I did in the 5 years I was with him. I spend my weekends hiking the beautiful trails of North Carolina, and I do not have to worry about anyone lying to my face or stealing from my pocket. I learned that the best way to deal with a person who takes you for granted is to show them exactly what life looks like without you. Marcus thought he was taking me for a ride, but in the end he was the one who got left behind in the cold, and I have never regretted leaving him in those mountains for a single second. My life is finally my own again, and the view from here is absolutely perfect.